Welcome to our webinar. I'm George Diaz, and I'll be your facilitator. Our host for today's program is Ann B. Friedman, CEO of Speak Out. She provides executive presentation and leadership communication consulting to individuals, companies, and nonprofit associations. Her newest book, Public Speaking for the Genius, will be released later this year. And now, here's Ann.
Thank you, George. Welcome to Why You Won't Say, I'd Rather Eat Glass Than Speak in Public. And I'm really glad you're here to join us for this great session. My goal is to help take you as far as you'd like to go in your speaking life. Now, you might be wondering, how did I come up with this crazy title anyway? It's all due to one of my most wonderful clients, an amazing woman from New Mexico named Judy Freeman. Judy found herself, like you may be, having to do more and more leadership presentations out in the community and as part of her business. Judy was the only woman in her high school class to go on to the university. She became a neurological researcher for more than almost 2 decades, then went into corporate as a technical marketing director, and eventually started her own successful marketing and public relations business. She was an avid horsewoman, and she was an advocate for her community. She was named to the United States Small Business Administration's Women in Business Advocate of the Year. And when I got together with Judy, she said to me what are now these immortal words, Ann, I'd rather eat glass than speak in public. Well, your reaction may not be quite as extreme as Judy's was. You may just distaste it. You may get little nightmares about it. You may just really not want to do it. And yet you may see the writing on the wall that says, I better get more comfortable with this. Wherever you are, I get it. You see, I never intended to be a speaker. My dream in life was to be an international news correspondent. I was going to travel the world finding really cool shops and restaurants and attractions and places to go and write about them for newspapers and magazines. When I majored in print journalism and communication at the University of Florida, notice I said print, I never saw myself in broadcast. I was a reporter for a few years, and then I started to freelance write. And when you're in your 20s and you're freelance writing, you say yes to almost anything. And so I was asked to write speeches. And I said, no problem. I researched the topic. I wrote them up. I said them out loud a few times. I handed them over to the client. They handed me back a check. Everybody was happy. There were no complaints. And then the bottom started to drop out. I was invited to go hear them make the presentation. And I have to tell you, many times I was mortified. I wanted to crawl under the closest table. Why? They were just awful, absolutely awful. And I really didn't know if it was the presentation, the speech I'd created, or if it was the speaker. So I came up with the idea of a consulting business that would help people to get through the speaking situations. And then the bottom dropped out even more, because I was asked to do a speech on being a freelance writer, and I was asked also to do speeches on public speaking. So everything I'm about to share with you during this program, I've either experienced myself, or it's come from working with several hundred, maybe now thousands of clients over the last 2 decades. Passionate, knowledgeable, intelligent people just like you who found themselves not presenting themselves in the best possible way when it was their turn to be on stage. So what are we going to do together tonight? We're going to take a look at what I call the 3 magic ingredients that go into a successful presentation. First, we're going to look at what I call the mental part of speaking. That's those terrible conversations we have in our head. Those are the voices that we hear that make it really impossible for us to do a good job when it's our turn on stage. And then we have the physicality of speaking. We have all these body parts that we need to control and keep them under control when we're in front of a group. And at the same time, we have our message and crafting the words and keeping them all under control. And we'll be looking at how you can do those things. And then I'm going to share with you a new way that you can go forward with your speaking that I've developed, and we'll talk about that a little later. And I'm going to wind up with what we call the spiritual or the intangible part of speaking. Some of the best tips I'll be sharing with you tonight will be coming towards the end, so I really encourage you to stay tuned. Now let's begin with the mental. There are three parts of the mental I'm going to share with you, and the first one has a very inelegant name. I hope nobody will be offended. I had a therapist who once called those conversations we have with ourselves that are not positive mind-fucking. And there are a lot of F words associated with it, which I'll go over with you in a minute. And then we have those demons, those dark sides of our mind that light up at the wrong times. But there are ways to overcome these things, and you can take action and control it. And I'm going to share some of those strategies with you in just a few minutes. Now, these are some of those really dreadful F words. Of course, at the top of the list is that four-letter word, fear. But it has a lot of cousins. It has failure. It has feeling frustrated that you don't come along across the way you would like to come across. You don't want to be a flop. You don't want to come across as a fraud or be considered fanatical. These are terrible words that we allow to run around in our head. Now, U.S. News and World Report does a survey periodically of the top fears of well-paid executives, and these are in descending order. Death is number 7. Sickness. Deep water. That doesn't go over really well in South Florida. Financial problems. And here are 3 more. Insects and bugs. Heights. And speaking before a group. Speaking before a group remains the number 1 fear of most executives. Isn't that amazing? And there's more bad news related to that, if you will. The National Institute of Mental Health says that 3 out of every 4 people suffer from some kind of speech anxiety. So if you do feel anxious about speaking, you're in very good company. And then there are those speaking demons. Voices from your past, from your childhood, from your parents, from coaches, from teachers, from friends that haunt you to this day. And we see things like, we hear things that say like, who do you think you are anyway? And what do you think you're doing on stage? You're a big fraud. You're no good. These are terrible voices, and they can really get in our way. Now here's a wonderful quote from Ann Landers, that fabulous newspaper columnist. Hanging on to resentment, hanging on to those demons, she might have said, is like letting someone you despise live rent-free in your head. Now, of course, it's easier said than done to get rid of all this stuff, but I'm a practical person, and I believe most of you are as well. And there are ways to get past those F words and to get past those demons. If we don't, we wind up with the worst possible nightmare a speaker can have, is nothing comes out of our mouth. We freeze. And there are ways around this. Let's look at some of them. There are 2 primary avenues that we're going to talk about now, and the first one is positive self-talk. That is replacing those negative F words with different words. And then we have the really heavy lifting of speaking, which is getting your ideas, getting information before you speak that will help set you up properly with your message, give you a better chance of connecting the way you want to connect. So let's look at those positive F words. And at the top of the list, I know it seems bizarre, but it is fun to connect to people. You can stand in line to catch a fortune. You can become famous doing these kinds of things. You will be considered forward-thinking, and it'll be a feather in your cap when you do these. These are wonderful efforts to begin to replace those other negative ones that we talked about before. Now, it's really important to think about the approach you're going to take with your audience. Many business audiences expect you to be logical. And so the question is, do you have the facts? Do you have the figures? Do you have the information to back up what you're proposing? On the other hand, there are a lot of people who don't want those facts and figures, and they want you to appeal to them emotionally. If you're too emotional, though, with a logical-minded person, what can happen? You won't connect. And then we have the moral character. Now, not that many people left on the planet get to use this particular approach, but if you were with, for example, the Children's Trust, which is a fantastic organization that David Lawrence helped found, and it's devoted to helping children from 0 to 6 succeed. It's pretty hard to say anything negative about something like that. So use whatever you have to your advantage, but usually it's a combination of logical and emotional, and it's up to you to figure out which approach is going to work. Now, Alan Monroe was an industrial psychologist in the 1920s. And he came up with what was called his motivated sequence. And he said, part of the reason we're anxious is because there are 4 questions that are going on in our audience's mind, or in our prospect's mind, or in our boss's mind, and whoever it is that we're trying to persuade. And here they are. And as I ask them, I suggest you say these aloud. Why should I listen to you? That's part of what your message is going to need to address. What's in it for me to listen to you? And then it gets worse. I begin to wonder, what's in it for you if I listen to you? And the last question that Monroe posed has a modern day variation. If you have a teenager, know a teenager, used to be a teenager, my daughter's not a teenager, and she still says these 3 words, and you might want to say these aloud also. Mom, nobody cares. What Alan Monroe said was, who cares? So these 4 questions are going on in your audience's mind, and it's our job to have the answers to those questions before we start putting our message together. We also have to deal these days with a question of technology, how much to use, how much not to use. Everywhere we see smartphones and tablets and computers and presentations these days. And it can be pretty upsetting if you see somebody looking down and not paying attention to you, if you're the speaker. One of the things to remember is today they may be tweeting about you. I encourage you to do that as you listen to this broadcast. If you want to, it's #AnnMiami if you'd like to talk about it. They may also be taking copious notes about your presentation, which is what you want sometimes, yes? The other question is, do you use video, do you use PowerPoint, and how much of it? And these are all upfront kinds of questions that you want to ask yourself and get the answers to. Another thing that makes us anxious is we realize that not everybody's like we are. And in our culturally diverse communities, how we communicate from Houston to Miami to New York to LA may not be the same. And then when you move overseas, there's a big difference between Colombia and Paris. So you want to know who you're going to be addressing and get that information in place as you put your message together. And then we have a huge generational divide. I know that these days, if I talk about a television show, that's totally natural for me to talk about. People under 30 look at me like I'm from the Dark Ages. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And similarly, there's language, there are programs, there are things that the under 30s know that I have, and I try to keep up, that I don't know. So you want to be aware of who's in your audience and how are you going to connect to them with your content. And you want to know this before you start working on your content. There are 4 types of presentations you might be asked to give. The first one is informative, and this is where you're simply sharing information with your audience that you know. This could be about policy changes, could be almost any topic, but I find that most of the people that I work with, the business and professional and community leaders, are not really doing informative presentations. I'll tell you why in a minute. Then you have entertaining. Most of us are not after dinner speakers, but if we're not somewhat entertaining, we're not going to keep our audience's attention, are we? Most people that I work with are either making persuasive presentations, that is, they're trying to get a yes at the end of the conversation to do what they want someone to do, or they're doing motivational presentations. That is, they are involved with trying to get people to do something because they want to do it. You think of a sports coach, you think of a minister or a rabbi, you think of a guidance counselor. These are the folks that may be doing motivational presentations, a sales leader. What are you doing? What kind of presentation are you doing? As I said, I find that most people are really making persuasive presentations. And this is part of that underlying anxiety we have, because we're asking people to do something that they might not otherwise do. And it's a little bit scary to do that. So as we close out the mental part of public speaking, I encourage you to write down some questions that you're going to need to have answered before you start doing your actual presentation. When you do, you're going to have much more peace of mind going forward. Now, the next area we're going to look at is what many people think of as public speaking, and I call it the physical or the physicality of speaking, and it has two primary areas. The first one is your body, all these body parts that we need to control when it's our turn to stand up in front of a group or even in a one-on-one situation. And then related to that is our content itself and its body parts. How do we put the message together? So let's start with our body. And let's start at the very top of our body. And sometimes, you gentlemen, I know, don't usually have problems with this, but we have these really bad hair days where we feel like we look terrible and yet we still have to go on, and we do. So the best advice is do the best you can and just ignore it and keep going. Now, moving down a little bit, we have our eyes. They say eyes are the mirror of the soul. When you're the speaker, you want to be kind to your own soul and try not to look at somebody who's looking at their watch or who's yawning or obviously bored, because you're going to feel terrible and you're going to think you're doing a terrible job, and you may not be. Maybe just that person. What you do want to do is make a clockwise sweep of the room with your eyes. It's a little different on a video. And you want to make sure that you do look around the room and talk to different people. And then you have, coming down, you have your mouth. And this is where the magic in speaking happens. All the words come out of your mouth. And this is really important. We have different volume. We have things come out of our mouth sometimes that we don't want. You may have heard speakers go and ah, or ah, all those kinds of expressions. They're called verbal fillers. How do you get rid of them? When you finish a sentence, close your mouth. It's impossible to say or ah if your mouth is closed. Now, saying it, of course, is easier than doing it, but this is something you can develop practice to do. I forgot your nose. Noses do itch at certain times. Noses do demand, like mine is of a cold. It will take center stage literally sometimes. Just scratch it and get over with it, but don't keep playing with your nose. If you need to scratch your head, it's okay, but do it once. Now, the rest of your body is also, your hands need to be in front of you. You want to make sure you don't cross them like the gentleman is in this picture, because it means your attitude, your body language isn't open. You want to make sure you stand or sit erectly. There are lots of things that your body can do to help you. Now, there are two tactics that I recommend that you don't do when you're speaking. Please don't point at me and your audience. Who gets to do that? The only one that really gets to do that is mom, right? And similarly, if you notice the gentleman in the slide, he's gripping the side of the podium. I've been doing this training for more than 20 years. I have never, ever seen a podium fall over. You don't have to hold it up. When you hold the side like that, you look like you're nervous. Instead, you want to rest your hands on the top of the podium. If you choose not to use a podium and you use a self-attached mic, which more and more people are using, you've probably seen them in the TED Talks and other public arenas now, you need to remember that you've got to know what your hands are doing. And if you start moving around, make sure it's a deliberate movement and not a frenetic one. Now, we have two of these, and they're probably two of our most important anatomical parts when we're speaking. Because as a speaker, you want to tune in to, is there murmuring? Are they going, do you hear feet moving towards the door? Do you hear a lot of people coughing? Everybody got sick all at one time? No. It means you're losing attention. So you watch that with your eyes, but you listen with your ears. And together, you can maintain control over your audience. In your message, in the content part of your message, where all that brilliance is assembled, you have four basic parts. You have the opening, where you grab my attention and bring us into the message. Then you have the pre-body, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's an overview of what you're to present. You have the body, and there are 5 formats for the body of a presentation. I don't recommend more than 3 ideas in any given presentation because nobody cares after 3 ideas. And then you have the close. What do you want to happen at the end of your presentation? Let's look briefly at some of these. Now, key thing to remember, though, is you don't want to have too much information because then you can lose the folks in your audience. One of the best ways is to open with a story, and I opened today's presentation telling you about Judy Freeman and a little bit about myself. People love stories, and that's the cocktail conversation that they go out repeating. But if you're going to tell a story, make sure that it's relevant. If it has nothing to do with your presentation, forget about it. It needs to be original, or at least sound original. Problem is, everything comes from the internet these days. So you want to make sure that you have something that sounds original. Similarly, if you can make it personal, if it really happened to you or someone you know, or make it seem that way, it's going to be more effective. And finally, if it's not engaging, if it's not a little bit entertaining, forget about it. Find a different story. By the way, these opening techniques and the 4 others I don't have time to go over with you tonight can also be used to open the segments of your presentation. Each of your main points you can open using an opening technique, and what that does is it reinvigorates the interest in your audience. Now, the second one is one of my favorites, and essentially what you want is to imagine that your audience is going, wow, this is really cool, I'm really glad I came. Most audiences will not be that expressive, but if you can get them to silently think that in the opening, that's a good thing, isn't it? Now, here are 2 examples. We are running out of drinkable water. If someone started a presentation that way, I might listen. And even more so with the next example. My personal portfolio is worth today $29 million. I don't know about you. I would take a seat in that audience to see what could I learn from that person. And that's what you want to do with your opening. You want to make it so compelling that nobody wants to go anywhere else. The pre-body is probably the toughest part of a presentation to write. And you can't do it until you've finished gathering your message and putting it in pieces. You want to sprinkle benefit points into your main points and make it so sexy that I want to listen. Remember what my pre-body was? I was going to share with you the mental, the physical, and the spiritual parts of making a presentation. Now let's talk about the body. The body of the presentation, there are 5 ways to organize your body. I'm going to give you 2 of them now, quickly. This is the core for persuasive presentations, and you want to get their attention right away. Did I gain attention? People are not automatically, immediately interested in what you have to say, so you've got to build their interest. Most people are coming ready to disagree with you or object to what you're doing. So how are you going to overcome that resistance? And then what is the action that you're asking at the end of your presentation? This is a format, one of the formats. Here's another one. This one is the popular Triple T. It's great for informal presentations, last minute as well as planned ones. And you may have heard about it. Basically, tell me what you're going to tell me, then tell me, and then tell me what you told me. There are 3 ways to lose weight without really trying that I'm going to share with you right now. And if you don't need the information, I encourage you to pass it along to a friend or a family member who might benefit. The first way is to always drink lots and lots of water. Since you will be running more frequently to the restroom, you will have less time to eat. The second way is to keep a lock on your refrigerator. Now, it won't prevent you from eating, but it may slow you down just a little bit. And the third way is to always eat with lots of other people. Why? It's impolite to speak with food in your mouth, isn't it? So your consumption will go down. In summary, so I'm going to tell you what I told you. Be sure and drink lots of water, keep a lock on your fridge, and party heavy. It's important if you use this formula to do your recap in the same order of your presentation. And if you told me in the beginning you were going to tell me 2 things or 3 things or 4 things, make sure you do. Because I'm sitting there making mental notes, waiting, and you said you were going to tell me 3 techniques and you've only told me 2. So make sure you've done that. Now, in a persuasive presentation in particular, you want to have built-in points along the way where your audience is nodding its head and agreeing with you. So when you get to the very end, you're not asking for the first time for them to agree with you. This is called the Socratic method. When you get to the end, there are 3 steps. I always recommend a summary, a recap of what you've been talking about. And then the question is, what is your call for action? What do you want to happen next? Some people put together a message and they really don't know exactly what it is. This wastes your time and your audience's time, especially today with everybody so busy. You want to really be clear on what you want to happen at the end of your message. A way to end a motivational message is with an appropriate quotation. And here's one of my favorites. It's from the writer Oscar Wilde. Experience is the name we give to life's biggest mistakes. Isn't that wonderful? And in public speaking and in technology, there are going to be mistakes, especially the first time you do something, and even the 10th time you do something. So the good speaker, the great speaker, the good professional, no matter what you're doing, we learn from those usually most expensive and most painful mistakes. We take them and turn it into valid experience, valuable experience that can help us go to the next level. Now the questions, I have a few questions for you, and that is, the first one is, do you sometimes feel like a secret? Do you sometimes feel like you are unseen in your office, in your industry, in your organization? And are you a little tired of that? Do you think that you're missing out on some really important opportunities because of your unease, your discomfort when it comes to speaking or even networking? Because they're very related. Do you find other people stealing your thunder, getting credit for your ideas because they speak up and you sit there more quietly, waiting your turn? And what if you could become more competitive and really build your reputation as a leader, as an expert? You can. Building on the years that I've been working privately and in groups and in corporations, I'm offering you our new online speaking studio. It's an 8-session course with really cool features. The first part, and I'm going to go over these just briefly. Now remember at the end, some of my best tips are coming up in the spiritual part. And also I'll be online at the end to answer any questions you have. So the first part, we're going to talk about your goal as a speaker, how you can give the audience what they want and still get what you want. We're going to look at how to brainstorm, get all that brilliance out of your head and get it down and figure out what to include and what to leave out. The third part is really cool. You're going to take an online 15-minute questionnaire before the course starts. And in this part, you'll get a 20-page report all about you, revealing whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, what your strengths are as a leader and as a communicator. And why is this important? Because we tend to communicate the way we like to be communicated with. And the reality is not everyone's like us. So we can talk over people or under people, and this instrument will help you understand how to put your content together and how to present yourself in a more effective way. We're going to look at 5 ways, I gave you just 2 of them tonight, of how to organize your content for both planned and impromptu speaking. I meant today. Then we're going to have another report which will show you what are your passions. What motivates you? And again, this is important because what you care about, what you're passionate about, not everybody else cares about. And so this will help you make sure that your message is right on point. We're going to look at that pre-body, that difficult part of a presentation. We're going to look at 6 ways to open your presentation and figure out how you can come up with the best ones. And finally, we're going to help you develop the kind of powerful close that will help you get the results you want when it's your turn to present. Now, what's included in the course, you get not only these 8 sessions that are online, live, each one about an hour with live questions and answers afterwards with me. They'll all be recorded, so if you have to miss a session, don't worry. You can watch them whenever you want to. You'll also get a 240-page all-color cartoon step-by-step workbook that I've written that helps take you through the entire process of developing a speech or a presentation of any kind. It has a $59 value. And those 2 reports that I was telling you about, which have a $200 value. And there's more. You get a certificate of graduation, plus with people who register early, I'm including a private strategy session where we'll go over your specific goals and any other questions you may have about speaking. Now, this early registration is just till Saturday night at midnight, and the early bird registration is only $695. We're going to be raising the price after Saturday night to $895. So I encourage you, if this sounds like something that would really help you, I'd love to work with you, and I encourage you to sign up. In the box to the right is the link that you can link on to register, and I also have it on the screen in front of you. And if you don't remember it, you can call me and I'll be happy to get it for you. Now let's talk about one of the sexiest parts, one of the most fun parts, and the most challenging parts of speaking, and that's the reality, the intangible reality that we cannot control everything. A couple years ago, a young entrepreneur named Juan Diego Calle was referred to me. He was going to be giving his first speech in front of 1,200 people in Cartagena, Colombia, at the ICANN conference. That's the internet gathering of all the internet, people who run the internet from all over the world. He was introducing his new company, Internet.co, which was a new domain extension going right head-to-head with .com. We worked for almost 6 weeks to get those 7 minutes really perfect. And he nailed it. The talk was broadcast, live streamed all over the world, and I felt like a proud mama watching him, and he got a standing ovation at the end. Now fast forward to just a few months ago, Juan Diego sold his company for more than $100 million to Neustar. Now, I won't take credit for that sale, but I know that when you master the public speaking skills the way Juan Diego did, all kinds of incredible things will open up for you. But the word gremlins are where things just pop out of our mouth that we didn't plan to say. They're not in our script. I was doing a workshop for a group of insurance salespeople, and I was talking to them about the attention span and how our hero, James Bond, in those adventure flicks, every 8 minutes he was in different adventure. But that's not what came out of my mouth. Instead, I said, every 8 minutes our hero's in a different bed. Well, you can probably imagine these men roared. I felt myself getting really red. And the bottom line was, what do? You just laugh, you cry inside, and you keep going. And it will happen to you. I'm not wishing this on you, but words and our mind, things happen. And then there's a related phenomena, and that's asking questions. Some people forget to prepare the answers to questions. They spend all their time working on the message and forget the fact that somebody might ask them a question. So I encourage you, as part of putting your presentation together, if you don't know what you're going to be asked, ask your friends, ask your colleagues, get the questions, practice the answers just like you do. And if you're asked something you really don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. I'll get back to you on it. Don't fake it. They're going to know. Now, those technology gremlins that I mentioned, they happen during a video broadcast. They happen live. I was giving a presentation for a client at a venture capital conference, and I was to come on right after the break. So at the break, we went and tested the video, we tested the PowerPoint, everything was perfect. Just like tonight, we tested everything just before we started, and the slides in advance during the presentation. It's going to happen to you. So what did I do? I had to reinvent the opening right on the spot because we each had 12 minutes. I couldn't wait for them to fix the video. I needed to do the rest of the presentation. What do? You just go on the show. I recommend that you're ready to do your presentation with absolutely no technology, no video, no PowerPoint. I always bring a printout of my slides with me in case something doesn't work. And then there's the clothing gremlins, or in the entertainment business, they call it a clothing malfunction, a wardrobe malfunction. You remember Janet Jackson in the Super Bowl, where she had that little indiscretion in the front. Well, I haven't had that happen, but I was giving a talk to a local chamber, and just before I went on, I went to the ladies' room to check myself out, and I washed my hands in the sink, and the next thing I knew, that sink had emptied into my crotch, and I had this huge water spot in the middle of my skirt. I ran out to the car. I got another suit because even locally, I always carry an extra outfit. I ran in, I put the other suit on. They said to me, weren't you just wearing a purple outfit? I said, I got tired of it. Women's prerogative. You don't want to have people look at a stain on your clothes or a wet crotch for an entire presentation. So an extra outfit is part of your speaker's emergency kit. I always carry one with migraine medication, food, extra USB, extra copies of my notes, extra bio, whatever you think you're going to need so that if something happens, nothing gets in your way. I want to flip the channel a minute and say, push those gremlins out of the way, because there's all kinds of excitement waiting for you when you become a confident, engaging speaker. You will be invited to introduce visiting dignitaries. You may be asked to present awards, whether it's Employee of the Month or for Boy Scouts or in the community or United Way. All kinds of opportunities will open up for you. You will be promoted. You may land more business. You'll get more new clients. You will be selected for leadership positions. You'll get hired for that dream job. You will be out there keynote speaking and be invited to be on panels and have media interviews. All of these things will start to happen to you, for you, when you get out of your own way, when you learn to control those mental F words, when you learn to control those demons, when you are willing to invest the time to do that upfront prep work that gives you the peace of mind. you will achieve these things when you learn to control your physicality, your body, and all its parts. And as you craft a really amazing message with a strong opening, a pre-body, a body, and a close. All of these are designed to help you be the powerful, effective speaker that you can be, so that you won't say, I'd rather eat glass than do public speaking. And now I want to remind you about your online speaking studio opportunity. It includes the 8-week course, the 240-page color workbook, which is a step-by-step guide, your 2 personalized communication reports, and a private strategy session with me. And again, with early registration, it's only going to be $6.95 until midnight on Saturday. After that, the price will go up to just $8.95, which is still wonderful. And I would love to have you join us. So now we're going to open the floor to questions. So I understand we have some questions, George, right?
Yes, we do. We've got one question. It was related to the program, and she asks, what are the dates for the class, and will we get a copy of the PowerPoint deck?
What are the dates for the class, and will you get a copy of the PowerPoint? For tonight, yes, everyone who's on tonight will be getting a copy of tonight's program, and I apologize for earlier. And the online speaking studio starts Thursday night, August 28th, and it's going to be 8 weeks. I have the dates on the website. They'll be on the registration. We will be missing 1 week, September 11th, and one time they'll be on Tuesday. But generally, they're going to be for an hour on Thursday nights, and it would be great to have you along. Another question?
Right, and if anybody has any questions, you can either raise your hand and I can open up your microphone, or you can type it in the chat box. So we have another question here, and it's, what kind of rituals do you have before you speak? I'm sometimes a little superstitious.
What kind of rituals I have? Oh, I'm glad somebody asked that. There are 2 rituals that I faithfully follow before I have to do a speech. Actually, sometimes 3. But let me tell you about the first one. I thought I had it here. There's an oil, lavender, that I rub on my hands. It's a relaxing kind of oil. It smells good, takes some of the tension away. And I also wear something, well, let me back up a second. In Ecuador, on New Year's Eve, families members give each other yellow underwear. It's supposed to be the color of gold. And we had an Ecuadorian friend who lived with us for a lot of years, and every year she gave us yellow panties. So I kept the tradition up. Every year I buy a new pair, and I call them, and now I have silver ones, I call them my prosperity panties. And when I have an important presentation, I put them on. I put on the lavender oil. I also, if it's a really important presentation, the day before will treat myself to a massage. So for you, you may want to look at going for a run, engaging in some bedroom activity, whatever it takes for you to relax so that you're on your game when it's your turn to present.
Okay, there's a question here. They say, what kind of stories work best and how personal should you get?
The best stories are personal. I call them cocktail conversations. You have to decide how far over the line, how much you really want to reveal. I mean, nobody really, really wants to know all the intimate details. But for example, there is a gentleman who has built a multi-million-dollar company. And one of the things he tells in his story is how he almost literally jumped off a cliff because he was so depressed where he was in his life. And then he got this realization that his purpose was to go out helping other people. Well, that's a really moving story if you're in that audience. You've got to be careful. There is a line to draw. People prefer funny stories to really sad stories. But the point is, if it's good enough to be repeated, then it's helping you make your point in your presentation.
Great. We have another one here, and I think you answered this a little bit, but are there other ways to tell if you're boring?
How can you tell if you're boring? My hope is it never happens to you. I don't expect it to happen to you after you go through tonight and your own hard work. You can tell you're boring if people are really not looking at you. They're looking around. Everyone is on their phone. Everyone cannot be getting a text message at the same time. Those are clues that will give you insight into the fact that you're probably not connecting. It's very painful when that happens, and we learn from it, and you probably will never do it again. Everybody has one time where they just missed it. Happens no matter what you try to do.
That's all the questions that we have.
And that's what we have. So I want to, this afternoon, so I want to thank all of you for joining us. It's been really a pleasure. I do encourage you to sign up if you're interested in our online speaking studio. And again, thank you so very much for being with us tonight. It's been really my honor, and I look forward to seeing you soon.